Hello, everybody. Welcome to Bible Nerds. This is episode 9, and I am with Bene,
Hello.
Mon,
Hello.
and Tisha.
Hi.
You know, it's amazing how we kind of have this podcast with the different arrangement of furniture and all of that every episode.
If you're watching the video, you can see how we've been trying a different setup every recording.
But thank you so much for joining us for this very, I would say, ambitious project of studying Leviticus. We are in episode 9. Would you believe that?
Yeah.
That is
Wow.
wild. And we are going to talk now about festivals. And so, let's begin.
Yeah. So the festivals, this talk was written by Kuya Mike, who's not with us, but we'll try our best to talk about the wonderful research that he did.
Yep.
So I think the first thing that we want to get across is how these festivals were built into the lives of the Israelites, and they had an important impact to how they saw the world and saw where everything was going to. Right? That it's really cool because I don't think of araw ng kakitingan.
Right. I was gonna ask that. When we think about festivals, is it like how we celebrate them here in the Philippines? Because
I
we have a
feel
lot of those.
Maybe for some people who are very patriotic or something, but at least for us, I think the significance of modern holidays is not the same as how it would have been for this agrarian culture that relied heavily on or sort of built their calendar around these different important timings that dictated whether or not they were going to eat.
Yeah.
Right.
I think we need to give a little background for those who are catching up. You know, it's like all of a sudden we're talking about festivals. So we are talking about a priestly book called Leviticus.
Right.
And in that book, God talks about how people were supposed to worship him different from the way they were worshiping the other gods.
Yeah.
Talking about their neighbors, the Canaanites, and also their former neighbors, the Egyptians. They had their own system of worshiping those false gods. And so God is saying, hey, show your allegiance to me. Don't do what they do. Do what I want you to do. And yes, part of those would be about laws and how to follow him, etc. But then he gives us this 7 festivals, and they're pretty important to God. They're like this. Can you just imagine how massive these parties are? It's just wild when you think about the number, the length of time. I mean, we don't do these anymore. 7 days,
Right.
7 weeks.
We don't have holidays that are 7 days long.
No.
We wish we have.
Yeah, I think a lot of people say, I wish there was a third day to the weekend, or
Right.
Right.
The closest might be like when you're in school, you have a foundation week. Even though sometimes there would still be
Oh.
classes, but
Right.
the things are happening
Yeah.
within the week, diba? Foundation
right.
week.
But that's just for students.
Yeah.
Right.
So that doesn't, once you're in the grind in the office,
Nothing.
Wala na.
yeah, maybe you get the 2-week vacation, but it's something that
No.
you
Yeah.
do on your own. It's not something that everybody
Yeah.
kind of
Does
just
it together. Right.
stops whatever they're doing to
Yeah.
celebrate this festival.
Right.
And I think, maybe somebody's asking, somebody new listening to this podcast, like, why are we studying something so ancient, like 3,000 years ago? They had 7-day festivals. Cool. But what has that got to do with me? And the answer is,
We'll see.
we'll see.
We'll see. One of the things that we want to do as a community in the feast and here for our listeners to this podcast is that we want to sit by by this book and sit and read and meditate the Torah and learn how to read it the way that it wants to be read, and through its wisdom see how it will teach us
That's right.
what it means and how we should live.
There you go. So suspense.
Yeah.
You will find out what it all means to you, to us living today.
Yeah, so let's dive in. So, starting from chapter 23, verse 1, it says, "The Lord said to Moses, 'Speak to the Israelites and say to them, These are my appointed festivals, the appointed festivals of the Lord, which you are to proclaim to the sacred assemblies.'" Right. So, the first one, and maybe you could say the most important one, which all the other festivals are sort of built around, is the weekly one, right?
There you
so
go.
the first festival is Sabbath. So we have talked about Sabbath in the previous episode, and we have been talking a little bit about it for some time now, right? But maybe we can kind of just like talk about it briefly. This command, to celebrate the Sabbath is something that is not just found in Leviticus, but it's
Yes.
found all over the Old Testament, right? In Exodus, in Genesis, right? That's
Yep.
where we get the precursor to this whole idea that, like, in the fabric of the universe, God has already established this sacred time.
That's right.
The very first thing that God declares as holy is time, actually. And the time for Sabbath. And it seems that this is really, really important. A lot of the other festivals are the way that you count them is by counting the Sabbaths until you reach that point. So it's almost as if this weekly base rhythm is the sort of the
Foundation.
foundation of their everyday lives. Right.
Which is cool because, again, being the preacher who's been preaching for 40 years, my my automatic question is, okay, what can I pick up from this? What can I pick up from this for my life?
Right.
And oh my gosh, the moment I ask that question about Sabbath, I can pick up a lot. Like we're desperate for Sabbath. I think this is the thing that a lot of people miss. And
Yeah, we
they're-
think of rest as something that's optional. Like it's something that we reward ourselves with.
That's right.
But I think in the ancient Israelite context, it
Yeah.
wasn't something you rewarded yourself with.
yeah.
It's just something that you had to do that was part of your week. It's
Yeah.
it's not an option.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which was not the same for their neighbors.
No.
Mentioning what Tito Bo mentioned a while ago
Yeah.
about how in Leviticus, diba, we want to contrast how the Israelites were supposed to worship
Yes.
the Lord and how their neighbors were worshiping the other gods.
Yeah.
They didn't have weekends during
Yeah.
that time.
I did do some research, and the interesting thing is there were other people groups that were practicing the Sabbath
Yeah.
because of the Jews.
There you go.
Right, okay.
So I think the more accurate way to say it is that the earliest mention of this sort of practice of stopping at a certain time once a week to rest, to reconnect with one another, with their family, with God, for the whole community to rest,
Yeah.
right, is first seen practiced by the Jews,
Yep.
right? And the more the Jews kind of got into contact, you can see how this practice was influencing the rest of their neighbors and
Yeah.
the rest of the world. There was a point in somewhere in 145 AD
Yeah.
where the Romans banned Sabbath
Whoa.
because they didn't.
It was spreading.
Yeah, they thought it wasn't like, it wasn't productive, it wasn't efficient. So that's where that comes from.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
but there were other Greco-Hellenistic communities that were practicing Sabbath because of the Jews.
Right.
That's what Josephus said.
So pauso sila.
Pauso sila.
Influencers.
I think that's the picture. That's what I think that's God's intention for all of the festivals.
Absolutely.
For them to be a sign to the rest of the world that this is how
Right.
God wants humans to live.
Yeah.
So dapat silang magpauso talaga.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Okay. I like where
Exactly.
this is going.
Right? and this is gonna make so much sense once we reach the last feast.
Okay.
But that's the first one, which is Sabbath. It's built into the cosmos, right? Maybe something that we just want to mention again is when we say rest doesn't just mean stopping, because
Right.
you're tired. In fact, if we look at the Sabbath command in Exodus, right? Because it's part of the 10 commands, right? The 10
Yeah.
words. In Exodus 20, verse 11, it says, remember the Sabbath day, right? So it begins with remember. So it's like something that's already built in, right? It's not like God's making Sabbath now,
Right.
now that we're in Sinai.
It's already there.
In the beginning, God
Yeah.
created Sabbath. So remember the Sabbath. By keeping it holy, 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son, or your daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. That's a very important clause because this is a festival that everybody's supposed to celebrate.
Yeah.
Not just the people who can afford to take a break.
Right.
Not just the whole community needs to participate in this because it's God's holy day. And it gives us the reasoning here. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. But he nuwacht on the seventh day. So because we're already using the word Sabbath, right? Shabbat, which means to stop. It's interesting how the author uses a different word here when he's retelling the Genesis story. Instead of using the word
Stop.
or Shabbat, he uses the word nuach, which sort of colors in the picture of what the resting really looks like. Gives a more
Right.
complete picture, right? Because the word nuach, right, you kind of have to gargle
Nuach.
the back of your throat.
Yeah.
It means to dwell,
Oh, okay.
right? So what happens after the 6 days is that God dwells in the wonderful world that he has made, to dwell with all that lives in the sea and the land and to be one with them.
Awesome.
That's the picture. And so that's the reason why this is so important and the basis of their whole schedule. That once a week they need to step into this reality that the God of the universe is actually living amongst them.
Right.
And what that looks like is not working.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not you have to rest just because that's like
Yeah.
a good thing to do or
Yeah.
as a reward for your hard work. You
No.
have to rest because in Eden there is no hard work. Right? In Eden, there is a kind of work,
Yeah.
tending to the garden, where
Yeah.
you're partnering with God to make beautiful things,
Yeah.
right? To make things that bring life. But there's no sweat of the brow. There's no
Right.
hard toil that we see in Genesis 3.
Right.
That came after.
The fall.
That comes after. So when we talk about Sabbath rest, it's stepping into that Eden reality. That God is a God of abundance and a God of provision. And he wants to partner with us and let us know that we don't need to, we're not in a zero-sum game where we need to provide our own needs just to exist. No, God is going to actually be the one to provide for us. And on the seventh day, we get to experience that.
Awesome.
Wow.
Okay. So, and we talked about how Sabbath spread throughout the ancient Near East world because of the Israelites. So let's hop over to the second festival, right?
Passover and the unleavened bread.
Yeah. So here's the interesting thing. I have this chart that I think is very useful. If we look at the year, the entire liturgical year of the Israelites, it's 7 months long.
Uh-huh.
No surprise there. Right? 7 months
Wow.
long. And you have the Sabbath, which is happening once a week, right? On the
Right.
seventh day. You're going to have 3 festivals in the first half of this
Of the year.
7 months, right? And then on the last month, the 7th month, you're going to have 3 more festivals.
There you go.
So that's sort of the picture. They're all happening like close to one another. It's not one festival every month.
No.
Okay. So and part of the reason why it's like that is because all these festivals are, at least most of them, are somehow connected to the agricultural
I
year.
see.
To the way that the harvesting, the planting, the sowing, like they're all connected to that, and we're gonna see that.
Awesome.
But first, we're gonna talk about the Passover, which is the first festival. It marks the start of the year, right? It's also the origin story of the Israelites.
Yeah.
So they're celebrating the time when God rescued them from Egypt
Right.
and delivered them and through the waters, right, of the Red Sea,
Yeah.
to make them into this new people. So that's how they open the year, remembering the time when they were created,
Yeah.
when the
as
people,
a people.
as the time when they were rescued and redeemed. So there's sort of three parts to it, right? Which would be the Passover and unleavened bread, the first fruits, and the Pentecost, right? Or the Festival of Weeks. They all have different variant names, so we'll try to mention
That's
the different
right.
variants so that
Yeah.
like when you're reading your Bible, you know which
Yeah.
one we're talking about.
Yeah.
But just a good reminder that the Bible is written in Hebrew, and
So there's lots of like.
different ways to translate it.
Yeah.
So the Passover begins at twilight on the 14th day of the first month, right? So what this is about is particularly the lamb sacrifice that they're going to do. Okay, if you think about what exactly they're going to do in the festival, that's very helpful. So they're going to bring a lamb, just like how we've talked about burnt offerings before.
Right.
But the difference with this one is that when they kill it, they do have to kill it by the
Temple.
the tabernacle,
Tabernacle.
or later on by the
Yeah.
temple. But they're going to collect the blood and they're going to apply it to the door frames because that's what they did
In Passover.
In Egypt.
The very first one.
during the very first one. And that's remembering how God protected them. Right? So there's a little debate on how you translate the word Pasach, which is the Hebrew word for Passover. And I'm more compelled towards the definition of Pasach as protecting, where God protects the Israelites
Okay.
from the destroyer. He's not that God kind of like skipped them.
Yeah.
Right.
Passes over.
Yeah.
That is one definition.
Some people prefer that translation where it Pasach to pass over. But if you look at the way that Pasach is used in every other instance in the Hebrew Bible, it
Protection.
protection.
There you go.
Yeah. So this is about their origin story, their Genesis story, their creation as a people, and how God rescued them and protected them, marked by the blood of the Lamb on the door
Yeah.
frames.
Awesome.
Right? Part of that celebration is the Festival of Unleavened Bread. So if you remember in the Exodus story,
Yeah.
on that night, when they painted the door frames, they were going to leave, right? But the sound of the horn, right? They're going to leave. And because they're in a hurry, they have to bring bread. They have to bring
Yeah.
bread because they're going to walk all the way to Sinai,
Yeah.
right? But they don't have time to bake them into full loaves.
That's right.
So they bring unleavened bread,
Right.
right? Because it's easier to do
It's
that.
faster.
Much faster.
Yeah.
I was talking to my dad about, or actually I was talking to my brother about how I wanted to get into sourdough bread. But like when I Googled like easy sourdough tutorial, like the first 5 minutes, the guy is explaining how you're basically gonna need 1 week. The first 24 hours
Yeah,
you're going
it takes
to
a lot of
let
time.
the starter, do something to the dough. You leave it uncovered and then
Yeah.
take it out. I'm probably messing up the procedure, but then you divide it and you flip it, and then you put some more flour and then you put in the. Basically, it takes a really long time to
Yeah.
make bread rise.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. So if you're in a hurry,
Can't afford that.
you can't afford that. You're gonna go on this journey,
Yeah.
right? It's gonna take them a couple of days before they reach the. What was the crossing, the Red Crossing,
Yeah.
Reed Sea Crossing.
Yeah.
So they need to bring the bread, right? So that's what they're going to do. It's remembering how God was with them, in that journey in the wilderness, right? And so what they do is they eat the the bread, it's almost like they're reliving
Their story.
They're reliving their story, which is really cool.
Yeah.
I think maybe we could talk about how when we forget our story or when we forget where we come from, we lose sight of our goal.
That's true.
Right? If we forget how God has saved us in the past, it's so much easier for us to like fall back into
Fear.
or who we used to be, how we used to live.
True.
We lose sight of where God is taking us and how God is transforming us. And so just having this deliberate start of the year sort of reliving their story, I think is something that helps ground them as a people.
That's true.
And so that's what changes sacraments, from just a gas station or sort of a to-do list. When I mean gas station, you go there just to be refilled. Yeah. Into a living reality that transforms us.
That's right.
When we realize that the sacraments are actually pointing to the story.
That's right.
And that's really what these festivals are about.
And it's our way of taking part in that story.
It's participating. You're literally eating bread.
Yeah.
That's if you're living comfortably in the promised land, which they will at a certain point, why would they have to eat unleavened bread when they can eat delicious,
That's true.
puffy,
Regular bread.
non-flat bread? but they are going to do this for generations to come to remind them of who they are.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is all connected to the first fruits. Okay, so after the seventh day, the day after the seventh day, the eighth day, right?
The eighth day.
That is the time when they get to harvest the first thing that they did plant, which is the barley. It's very interesting. So some translations actually don't say first fruits, but the first harvest, because different crops harvest at different times.
Right.
And the first thing that does get to grow is barley.
Oh.
Like I actually have some examples throughout the Bible that mention this. And you like when you read them, wherever they are in the story, you're kind of like, why did they have to mention like this was the time when the barley was ready for harvest? Right? It's so random. But then if you remember that these people are an agrarian culture, right? Where they really have to they're thinking about these things all the time. This is what's relevant to them.
It's like a point of reference.
It's a point of reference.
That they all recognize.
It's like TikTok for us today.
Yeah.
Right? Because we're the internet generation or whatever.
So archaeologists, like 2,000 years from now, will be wondering, like, what's TikTok? Why do they keep on saying, I saw this on TikTok?
Exactly. So there you go. Agrarian culture versus internet culture. That's the picture here. So if you look at Exodus 9, verse 31, this is referring to the 10 plagues, right? When God sends the hail, if I'm not mistaken. And the narrator in this story just kind of like says, "Dear reader, the flax and barley were destroyed since the barley had headed and the flax was in bloom." Right? Meaning it was already ripe for the first fruits harvest, which is the same time as Passover, right? This is the last plague before the ninth or eighth plague, if I'm not mistaken. So this is all happening within the same season, right? Yeah. And so the picture here is that once the barley has risen, right, what they're doing is they're getting a portion of it and they're offering it to the Lord, kind of saying that, God, this is the initial thing that you've given us, but we're giving it to you because we want your blessing for everything else that is to come. We're trusting that you're going to provide all the other things that we're going to harvest. This is like the first sign, the first symbol that of God's provision, but we're trusting that there's going to be more.
Yeah.
Right.
Beautiful.
So this is not to be confused with the tithing law, which is a different law entirely that we do find in Leviticus, right? Where once a year they do give a grain offering for the priests for all their hard work taking care of the sanctuary, getting bloody, getting their hands dirty with all the animal sacrifices.
With all of their sins, must be a lot.
Yeah. So they give 10%, a tenth of the grain, right, to the priests once a year. Right? But it's different from this first fruits harvest, which is offered to Yahweh.
Yeah.
And is a symbol of trusting that God is going to bless the rest of the harvest.
So do they offer the entire first harvest?
That's a good question. We can read here. A sheaf. They're only supposed to bring a sheaf. So it's a bundle. A bundle before the Lord.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Although, as a pastoral application, we're not farmers. Most of us are not. So when you say first fruits, a lot of people can apply that and say, my first expense, Lord, from my salary is, I give it to you.
Sure. I think that's really that's sort of stepping into the spirit of what Leviticus is trying to say. It's trusting that God, this is the first part of my salary, and I know that you're going to provide for the rest. Definitely. I think this is going to lead us into an interesting conversation at the end about how do we apply things from the Bible. I think I just want to caution from trying to
yes, of course,
plug up, because there are countless examples of how people have used
That's true.
the tithing laws and things like this, the first fruits, to tell people that they have to do this thing or that thing, give this certain amount to the church, when it doesn't really say that. In fact, if you actually read it, it's applied in a completely different way. And so learning how to apply these things with wisdom, of course, takes time. It takes rereading and sitting by the feet of this text and allowing it to guide us to read it better. And because it is trying to say something.
Yep.
We just want to make sure that before we try to apply it to our own context, we see what is this actually talking about to the original audience.
That's right.
There you go.
Yeah. I guess there's this knee-jerk reaction trying to, so there's 7 festivals. They're very important. It seems it's very important. So I guess it's important to me too. So I need to figure out how I can practice these 7 festivals in my life. But maybe there's wisdom in just trying to learn what these were about in the first place.
That's right.
Before coming to some sort of application, because we will see it. We'll definitely get to that, but we need to see how they all kind of flow together first.
Right, yeah. Although the instinct is not wrong.
Instinct is not wrong.
The Bible does have something to say about how I should live, what I should do, and how I should give. Since we're talking about giving.
Yeah.
But
what to do with our resources.
Yeah, what to do with our resources.
That's the picture here.
Yeah. And so what we want to see is not just kumbaga, one-to-one, okay, here's a story, here's what happened, how do I apply this?
Thank you.
But
it's
more
not
of
an A to B kind of.
No.
Right.
No.
More of a
Unless you want to
cohesive
you buy some plot of land in Batangas, start planting some barley.
or spreading blood on your door.
Yeah. If you want to do that, go ahead. But
Eating unleavened bread.
I think most people will think you're crazy.
That's hard to do pag nasa condo ka kasi nakakatakot.
Okay, so let's move on to the third festival, right? The third festival that is found in the first half of the year, it's called the Festival of Weeks, or the Festival of Harvest, right? Or Pentecost. Okay?
Pentecost.
So we know Pentecost as the day,
Birthday.
the birthday of the church, right? So I want you to set set that aside first because it doesn't really have anything to do with. Actually, it does, but
But that happens
happens
later,
later
on.
on.
that happens
Yeah.
way later on. So you'll see why it's connected to the first two festivals.
Okay.
Okay. So the word for 50 in Hebrew and Aramaic, and there's another language, but I forgot. Is in Arabic. There you go. And Hebrew, Arabic, and Aramaic, right? For the word for 50 is chamishi. Chamishi. And chamishi is the same word that they refer to the scorching east wind.
Interesting.
Okay, so I'm going to read to you what it actually says here, right? From the day after the Sabbath, the day that you brought the sheaf, right, of the first fruits, count off 7 full weeks, right? Because everything's 7.
I wonder how they count those.
Right? Do they have like a calendar,
Yeah.
Google Calendar? Anyway, so count off 50 days up to the day after the 7th Sabbath, right? So you're counting 1, 2, it's 50. Same word for the east wind, right? During this particular time, it's the most, how would you say this? Sort of the anxious, anxiety-inducing time in the harvest season. Because you just planted, right? You got the first fruits, and you have 50 days before you're going to be able to harvest the rest of the crop. In the desert,
Yeah.
in the the land where Israel is,
Right.
which is very much dependent on rain because it lacks water. It's not like Egypt, which is well watered, has the Nile River, right? They have an irrigation system. If the east wind blows, their crops are all dead.
Right.
Whoa.
Right.
When I read about this blew my mind.
Intense.
So every day they're counting, they're praying to the Lord.
It won't come.
Don't send the east wind.
Rain,
Wow.
rain, go away.
Okay.
Parang-
Yeah.
So that's how they know that it's 50 days na. Kasi every day they're counting.
Yeah, no, it literally says count off
You-
50 days.
You really have to
Right,
count.
right.
Yeah. And once it reaches the 50th day, right, they celebrate. It's a big celebration because they were able to grow the harvest. It's like this delicate balance, right, of not having too much rain, not having too much heat, just making sure that everything is going to grow. So this is like this trusting, waiting season that God is going to protect their crops so that everybody has enough to eat for the rest of the year.
Yeah.
That's what Pentecost is,
Beautiful. Beautiful.
right? I really want to Bible nerd and like hyperlink to all the scorching east wind stuff. I'm sure the three of you are thinking of that, like in Jonah and
Yeah.
the rest of the minor prophets, but
Right.
we'll save that for a different discussion.
But Jonah. Oh.
But so there, those are the three first festivals, right? And it all has to do with this beginning harvest, right?
It's all food.
It's all food
Related.
It's all these festivals are food related. It's implied that each festival was a big feast. That it was a time for people to celebrate because there's food.
Yeah.
Okay. Are you ready for the second half?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, let's go back to the chart. Second half of the year, the fifth festival, and the first one for the second half, right, is the festival of trumpets.
Trumpets. Can't eat that.
Sorry,
You can't eat that.
you can't
Oh.
eat that.
It's not food.
It's not food, but it's still important because this marks the 7th month. Okay,
Seventh month.
Just like how the 7th day is important, the 7th year is important. The 7 times 7th year, the year of Jubilee is important. The 7th month is also important,
Yeah.
Wow.
right?
July babies.
July babies. I'm not sure though if it
If it's yeah,
if it matches
I
to
don't
the
think we're not
Gregorian
July is
calendar.
At all.
July is nutrition month, di ba?
Oh, that's so interesting. That's so interesting.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
I didn't know about that.
Yeah. So let me check my notes here. Yeah. Okay. So it's also rainy season.
Yep.
Okay. So it's rainy season. And so the reason why they're blowing the trumpets is they're telling God, God, send the rain. Actually, all these three, the Festival of Trumpets, the Day of Atonement, and the Festival of Booths have everything to do with water.
Oh.
Because they need it for the first month.
Yeah.
It just blew my mind when I was like reading all of this. The moment you see how this is what all of these things are the most important timings of an agrarian culture,
Right.
like a agrarian society, that they have decided that these were also the most important times to Yahweh, right? That these are the times that we need Yahweh the most.
Yeah. Because they really feel it. It's really present.
Exactly.
It's something that I think part of the reason why it's a little harder for us to imagine this today is because we have groceries. I mean, we have
Exactly.
like freezers, and we can
Exactly.
store food
Yeah.
for weeks.
Yeah.
We don't have to wait for the rain. We have like
No.
irrigation systems and monocrop farming
No.
and so on and so forth. Like it's
Canned goods.
canned goods which can last for like 3 years, and but they didn't have that, and so because of that also shaped the way that they look
I mean,
at their lives and
food
God.
is
Right.
life.
Yeah,
Food is life.
you literally don't live if you don't eat.
Yeah, because like
Yeah.
food is art now. Food is fun, and
Yeah.
food is literally life. And if there's no food, there is no, life.
Side ano lang to, pero lagi ko mina-mention kay Katia yun na like paano nangyari yun, no? Like imagine once upon a time our ancestors were just hunting meat, like hunting animals. So and then we eat to live, right? So you have to
Yeah.
eat the entire thing. You can put it in the freezer.
Yeah.
And then how did we get from that to where we are today, wherein like what you're saying, when the food is kind of an artistic thing now, and we have like we get very
The
creative
answer
with
is
it.
they were already doing that during that time. That's how crazy humans were.
What do you mean by that?
They were, even if it wasn't really necessary for just nutrition, people were doing stuff to make the food tastier, to look better, to look
Yeah,
more
yeah.
appealing. Because humans are just creative images of God. Like when you look
Right.
at like food historians and they talk about like the early
Really.
recipes that people are doing, it was really fascinating that they were doing all sorts of things using all sorts of herbs and spices.
Yeah, that's part of what caused. I mean, that's
It
part of
caused all
what
the wars.
motivated. Yeah, the conquest and the traveling to different locations.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love it. I
Okay,
wish we should
trumpets.
start a food history podcast after this one. But yeah, so this is the 7th month. It's the last month of the year. You signal it and you're telling God, God, we're grateful for everything that has grown, right? And we've already harvested, right? We want to declare that into this coming year, these new things that we've sown,
Yeah.
right, are going to grow, that you're going to send the rain. You're going to give us
Yeah.
the water that we need, the living water
Wow.
that will give us life, right?
Wow.
That's what the trumpet sounding is for. Okay. So the next one after that is the Day of Atonement, which
Yeah.
is the 10th day, if
Which
I'm not
we
mistaken.
talked about in a previous
Which
message.
we talked about at length, right?
Yeah.
where it's all about removing and washing away the
Reset.
the sin
Yeah.
and the death from the camp, right? And it's in the rainy season. It's just really interesting to think about that.
Maybe that's how they clean the the tabernacle.
Yeah, they did have this big cauldron
Yeah.
called the sea, where they collected water in it, and they don't say what it's for, but we just assume that they use it to wash the blood
Yeah.
off of things.
Yeah.
Yeah, and blood and water is a priestly symbol, right? The sprinkling of the water. Anyway. Okay, so Day of Atonement, we've already talked about that. It's removing the sin and death from the camp. You know, it's getting ready for the new year, right?
Yeah, cleansing.
Yeah. And then we move on to the last one, which I think is the coolest one, which is the Feast of Booths, or called the Feast of Tabernacles. Right? So that's the last one. So there's a lot of things that go on the last festival. So we'll talk about the two main elements. Okay. So the first element is the huge sacrifice that they're going to make. They're going to sacrifice 70 bulls.
70.
70.
70.
Yeah. In 7 days. Starting with 13 bulls. Okay. So you would think that they would do 10.
Yeah.
10. No, but they do 13 because what they're going to do is every day they're going to use a lesser amount
I see.
until on the 7th day they only sacrifice one bull.
I see.
Kaya sila na-anxious sa first fruits at saka sa Pentecost kasi wala na yung 70 bulls.
Maybe. But this is a huge sacrifice. This is the biggest sacrifice.
Yeah.
Right? This is the sacrifice that a high priest makes, right? They sacrifice a bull. But on the festival of booths, they sacrifice 70 bulls. And
Poor bulls.
it's well regarded. It's well regarded.
By the way, in the talk, we call this Festival of Tabernacles,
Okay.
and which also is called booths, which is also called shelters.
Yes.
Yeah.
So lots of
Many
names.
names.
Yeah. And it's referring to the temporary structures that they're going to build. But we'll talk about it later. Let's talk about the bulls first.
Okay.
Right? So it's well regarded in the ancient world that they thought that there were around 70 nations. Or not around. There were 70 nations of people in the whole world. Right? You read the Tower of Babel story. You read the genealogy of Abraham. You'll see there's 70 nations. Right?
Yeah.
You read about Paul's, even in the New Testament, there's this assumption of 70 nations.
Yes.
Yeah, the 70 were sent.
Yeah.
Diba?
That's
Yeah.
right.
And Deuteronomy talks about the 70. So anyway, so if you read about what the prophets have to say, what this festival is for, and you read about just everything about what the expectation of this festival in particular. Remember how we mentioned that the Sabbath kind of was something that influenced the rest of
Their neighbors.
their neighbors. They have this picture or this idea that when God is going to bring all of creation together, when all the nations are going to come and recognize who Yahweh is,
Yes.
Yeah.
it's going to happen on the Feast of Tabernacles.
There you go.
Whoa.
So they're making this sacrifice on behalf of every nation in the world.
Wow.
Wow.
Lovely.
And it's for their reign. It's for the reign. Because if you read Zechariah, okay, so this is Zechariah. He's one of the prophets who has the same new creation expectation that one day all the nations are going to gather around in Zion, in the temple, right, to celebrate the festival of tabernacles together. Right? So he says here that then the survivors from all the nations that have attacked Jerusalem will go up year after year to worship the King, the Lord Almighty, and to celebrate the festival of tabernacles. If any of the peoples of the earth do not go up to Jerusalem to worship the King, the Lord Almighty, they will have no rain.
Aw.
If the Egyptian people with a well-watered, river that provides them all the water, do not go up and take part, they will not have any rain either. Right? So if you think about what's happening in Leviticus 20:23, where they're talking about the Feast of Tabernacles, they're sacrificing the 70 bulls. They're actually praying for each nation
Wow.
that God would send them rain too.
Amazing.
Wow.
And one day they're going to be with them. They're going to join them and make that sacrifice themselves. But for now,
They're praying for them.
as mediators on
Yeah.
behalf of the
They're-
whole world.
They're being priests.
There you go.
Right. They're praying and paying for them because they're making the offering.
Yeah.
The bulls come
Wow.
from them. Like,
Exactly.
it's their bulls.
Exactly.
It's 70 bulls. It's a lot of bulls.
Bulls.
Can't even imagine
For every
how
nation.
big
And
of a
so
farm you
there-
would need.
So this symbol, this feast, is them stepping into this reality that God has called them to be a holy nation and
Yeah.
a royal priesthood,
Yeah.
where they're not just where they're bringing the Eden blessing
To all nations.
To all nations.
Wow.
Okay, so that's interesting. Would you say that the final festival then is kind of like the first, wherein they are reminded of their identity, of their role? As sa una kasi, diba, Passover,
Yeah.
they're reminded of how they were redeemed by the Lord
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
slavery, and this time they're reminded of what their role is supposed to
They're
be for
called for.
what they're called for the rest of the world.
Yeah.
Wow.
Very good.
Wild.
It is.
Wow.
Thank you for that. That's a great reflection. The whole year is this them living their story of where they come from and who God is calling them to be.
Yeah.
This was really a big festival, right? You would see the golden candlesticks out in the courtyard, right? With the golden bowls and the four ladders to reach the candlesticks and just all these different priests. They're pouring out these pitchers of oil, right? It's just this big festival. There's lots of dancing and singing, right? There's lots of lights,
Lights.
right? Because the candles are all lit, right? It's I think that's why it's also called the Festival of Lights.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, right. This was also the day when Jesus in the Gospel of John goes into the middle of the temple courtyard, right? On the highest day. Right? The highest day of the Festival of Booths, and he declares that come to me, anyone who's thirsty, for I am the living water.
There you go.
And this festival where they're praying for rain.
Wow.
And he also says, I am the light of the world, with all the candles.
Right.
It's really insane. This is like one of the most like significant and symbolic festivals in Israelites'
Yeah.
time. And we've only talked about the first half, right? So there's actually this whole water thing that they do, right? So they get these fronds, palm fronds, right? And they beat the altar with it, right? And then they walk around it 7 times. And then they pour water. They pour water. And when they finally move into the promised land where the temple is, you know how there's like this pool, the pool of Shiloh? They get water from there and passes
Yeah.
through the water gate. Yeah. And they pour it onto the altar and then it flows down the steps,
Right.
which Ezekiel later on
Yes.
will say that that's the picture of the new creation. So, I wish we had more time to talk about how cool this is but basically what this is all about is about new creation, not just for the people of Israel, but for all the nations. And that's why all the prophets, when they read this, they're talking about the future expectation that one day on a festival of tabernacle or festival of booths, it will be homecoming
Yeah.
for all the people, for all the exiles, and for all the different nations that have lived away and against Yahweh's way. They're going to come to know him and they're going to worship him as he gives life and water to his people.
Wow.
And they live in tents.
They live-
So the reason why it's called the Festival of Tents
Because they go camping.
they go
is they go
camp.
camping. Right.
Ginagawa na natin yan.
And so what they do, and I want you to picture this, particularly when they move to Jerusalem, right? Sorry, when they move into the Promised Land, this becomes a pilgrimage festival, right? Where they travel all the way,
Yeah.
right? And because they could not possibly fit in this city.
Everybody, yeah.
Yeah, what they have to do is by the hillside of Jerusalem, right? They're going to set up tents for them to live in. And I mean, it's practical, but also it helps them relive the story
Yeah.
that the place where God recreated them, right, was in the wilderness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what they had to do during that time.
Yeah.
Live in tents.
Yeah. So they're there, and they're supposed to make it as beautiful as possible. Even today, Messianic Jewish people and Jewish people in general, when they do celebrate the Festival of Tabernacles, they're going to try to out compete one another for the most beautiful tent that they can make, right? I mean, like, I guess it's out of jest, but the pictures, they're trying to recreate Eden, right? To create this Eden in the wilderness, and just imagine the sight of like this rolling hills full of these beautiful tents that are made out of different trees, right? It's very specific. Like you have to use different kinds of wood and the branch. It looks like a forest,
There you go.
right? It looks like a garden where the humans are dwelling with God.
Yeah.
Yeah. As they await and pray for water.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
So yeah, that's the picture. So okay, I ended there because I wanted to mention how the Festival of Booths looked different when they were living in the wilderness and when they were living in the Promised Land.
Yeah.
In the Promised Land, right? When it became a pilgrimage festival, right? They actually later on added these clauses and rules to make it more doable for some people. Like, for example, if you couldn't come to Passover on the day of Passover, you have up to 1 month to come anytime, right? Why would they include that?
Right.
Unless, we're talking about a future generation that, has spread across the Jewish diaspora. So the way that these festivals were celebrated were constantly changing. Okay, so this ties into our conversation, right, about
How to apply it?
how to apply it.
Yes.
Because, like, many of these festivals cannot be celebrated because of the fact that there is no temple anymore for the Jews,
Right.
Like, they cannot celebrate the Passover festival the way that it properly should be. And rabbis talk about how the unleavened bread festival becomes so important then, because that's something that they can do even if they don't have the temple anymore.
Can they still sacrifice 70 bulls?
They cannot sacrifice the 70 bulls anymore, but they can live in tents.
Yeah.
So that's what they do. And like, there's this Jewish community in New York where their streets, like imagine the street just full of tents.
Oh.
Some people use container vans and all sorts of things. They just try to outbuild one another with the
Yeah.
most beautiful
Yeah.
temporary shelters. Some of them have like this tarpaulin. It's pretty cool.
It's an urban feast of
so-
booths.
Throughout the generations, they're actually applying it in different ways.
That's right.
But so what we shouldn't be doing is reading Leviticus and thinking, okay, I need to get, I need to have an altar and I need to have like
Nope.
some livestock ready.
Nope.
70 bulls.
70 bulls on hand. That's not what we're saying. That's
Nope.
actually not how to
Nope.
apply the Bible into
Absolutely.
our everyday lives. It's also not, just reading it and then spiritualizing it and just like trying to
Right.
like think of how this
Yeah.
you know
The 70 bulls in my heart
yeah
that
exactly
I have to offer to the Lord.
exactly
I will journal it.
exactly both
Right.
Extremes.
are not going to they don't give justice
Okay.
to the wisdom and the beauty of these texts. Right? I think at the heart of what these festivals are about is shaping their entire year around the story of how
Right.
God, how Yahweh has redeemed, has provided, and is transforming his people to become the image of God priests
There you go.
that
Yeah.
will bring healing to the nations.
Yep.
Like, imagine making your year like the coming and going of each month a experiential reminder of that reality, that you're not just a farmer, that you're not just like a slave or a peasant,
You're
or
not just working for.
you're not just working from dust. You come from to dust, you will return.
Yeah.
It's this larger reality that God is going to redeem this whole universe, because the whole purpose of why God has made this place is for Sabbath, for Him to dwell and to
That's
be
right.
one with humans, animals, and all of creation. Right? And until we reach that day, what God's people must do is to shape their time
Yeah.
and their lives around this reality that is, well, because of Jesus, already here, but not fully there yet. And we're waiting for that final restoration and recreation where all the nations, where us, are going to be brought
Right.
into the fold of God's people in His New Jerusalem.
Yep. Woo.
There you go. Thank you so much for joining us. This is an amazing discussion. And we hope that you can join us again, because we are going to have episode 10,
Our last one.
the last discussion
On
on the book of Leviticus. It's amazing. We're almost there. So we will see you. God bless you.